Alright, so here is a risk worth taking. This is a complete experiment that I've dreamed up. I want to get a particular look on the sail and on the upper half of the boat in which you can see plates. And this is fly wire, it's molded, it's not woven. And I have cut carefully with a scalpel all those little sections out. And now I'm just taking this little piece out. It's actually not that hard to cut this stuff, but you do need to try and get those little edges out, which I've only been partly successful with. So placing it on there, and now here is the finishing touch, which is alfoil. I'm just seeing how this is going to look and whether this is going to look any good on the sail, and I have to say it looks pretty nice. I'm happy with that. So now we can move on and get the boat finished, and you can see there's a terrific mismatch between the upper half and the lower. I think it's because the upper half has shrunk a little bit due to the application of those sides. So I'm using here, believe it or not, Play-Doh, because I need to put a bracket in here which can just push the upper half of the hull out a little bit. It won't take much, just a bit, but in order to do that I've got to get an idea of the profile so that I can cut a piece of perspex to the right size. So the best way of doing that, I think, I mean, you can use casts, you can use all sorts of things, but honestly, for what we're doing, Play-Doh is fine, and it's worth $1, and it takes no time at all. Just pushing it on nicely and making sure that it's got the fit, and it's going to run around this piece of this watertight cylinder. I've got a spare section there, so here it is. Just pulling the glad wrap off, and the easiest way of doing this is just to put a knife right through it. So I've got one flat side, just checking that's very nice. Got to be delicate with this because it's yeah, flat side down, and that will now give me the dimensions of that piece. And you can see I've made it out of perspex right there. It's sitting over the watertight cylinder, and when you put the top down it looks now pretty darned even, just as it is. But even so, it's not particularly even, and what I've done here is I have put glad wrap on the top half of the hull. I'm using carbog on the lower half. I'm just testing the bog, it's still loose. It's a little bit later now and it's a cheesy sort of consistency. So this is the chance that I've got. You've really got to watch the timing on all of this. And now while it's cheesy, I'm using my scalpel, cutting through there, dropping it as well accidentally. We'll pull the glad wrap off, and we've now got a nice base which has closed the gap between the top and the bottom. It all looks a bit rough, but in fact it works very nicely indeed. And so now I've taken everything out. Obviously I've clipped it all together, and I'm using the sander on it and sped this up a little bit just so you can see the amount of work it takes. I've got very fine grit on here, so I just want to make sure I get it back very nicely, and so that the hull is really nice and flush. It's actually a very pleasing process to do this kind of thing, I find, because in front of your eyes that you see the hull just so nicely taking shape, and that crack is now basically non-existent. So now I've got a block of plastic for the sail. I know where these holes are to go. I'm using my computer just to get a ratio, just so that I can measure on that picture and then write straight on there where the hole is to go. All the holes have been drilled. I now need to put that in the sander and get a half round on it so that it fits a bit better. I've made a nice new base, as you can see, and here it is. It's all coming along, and that edge looks brilliant now. It's lovely and smooth. Alright, so this is what it now looks like. Darn sight better. I've got to do something with those holes in the front, But basically the hull is pretty smooth. It's good enough for this. And now I need to cut slots in the deck, and I need to plank the deck. And I'm using pictures that I've got of brass etched material that someone's made painstakingly. You can just get this stuff right off Google, but I'm going to make it manually. I'm going to make it out of, every plank is going to be made out of plastic. This is just over 2 mil thick, I think, and I'm cutting it piece by piece. This plastic is 1.1 mil thick. That's a little bit bent, actually, that one. What you learn by doing this is you need a sharp blade, you need to spend some time lining up, and the very first cut you take needs to be very light indeed, and the next one too, until finally it comes away and it's nice and sharp. Now obviously this is the wonder of the Dremel, to cut slots in the hull. It's also making the hull a bit lighter by doing this, not a great deal, but the new deck, when it goes on, will certainly not be weighing any more than what I'm taking out of here. So these little ridges that go across are all in the plan for the upper deck. And in essence what we're going to do is hold the upper deck in place, strengthen it, and keep the whole hull nicely together. This was always my intention with this upper deck. And now you can see it all slotted. Looks pretty good. I'm just measuring up a what's going to be a periscope hole in the top of the sail, and I'm going to cut a slot at the same time in the bottom of the sail, because I'm going to make, and you will see me make, a self-raising periscope that's got a float under it. Okay, so I've sanded this back, now just using the file to take the rough edges off, but that's now fitting very nicely. It's nice, and it's got a nice round shape on it. It's looking good. Excellent. Okay, so this is where we're at. We've got all of the slots now in the hull, and we're ready to start planking. I've made this first section. I've obviously cut a piece out of it so that I can get to the screws which hold the hydroplane mechanism in place, but once the boat is running we won't be pulling that out very often, but potentially will. Now this piece of plastic here is, I'm not even sure what this is, but it runs the length of the upper deck, and it causes quite a bit of complexity in how the upper deck is to be planked. And this is what it looks like. Goes right from one side to the other and right the length of the deck, and I'm going to have to plank now all around that. It's quite easy to do, but you just have to do it slowly. Now here we go. Here's the fly screen on the sail. I'm starting to put it all together, and while I do that and while that dries, using super glue just to put planks in place. And you can see this happening. It's just a nice slow process. I tend to use my knife and the grinder. The bench grinder is very, very helpful at trimming plastic. So it seems like overkill. In fact, I find the power tools often, if you use them with great care, do wonderful fine work. Now that is looking okay. The next step is to, it doesn't match up across the front of there, so I put a separate piece on the front, and I'm just going to pull it across and then stick it down so they all line up. As you can probably imagine, it's an odd shape, and if you tried to get one piece to go right round it, well, it wouldn't work. You have to use three pieces. So this is it. It's not looking too bad. I've used the scalpel to cut little odd ends off, and it's all pretty neat. And now I'm using another layer of epoxy, and I'm pretty nervous about this because I'm not sure how well this is going to work, and I'm going to do the whole thing in one go. Now this epoxy lasts for 10 minutes, so there's no time to waste. In fact, I underestimated the amount of epoxy I needed, and it's all pretty anxious. I'm thinking this might not work and I might be back to square one shortly, but here it is. I'm just smoothing it out, making sure it's all okay. And now we go to step the final step, and here is the alfoil. It's very fine stuff. And there we go, and I realized straight away it's not in the right place. Pull it back. Just got to get that front round part nice. And here we have it. Now I discovered after a little while it's pretty important early in the piece, now that I've done a fair bit of this, to get the scissors out and trim it back a bit, because the more you've got sitting around you, it can be good because it makes sure that your fingers don't touch the glue. My fingers didn't there, it might look like it did, but I'm using a cloth, happens to be underwear. Never mind, you did see that. I just use rubbish in the shed. And gradually just pulling this back, making sure there's no air in it, getting rid of all of the extra slack in the stuff, just cutting it with scissors, trimming it back. I should have done that earlier. And finally, and I'm a little bit panicky with all of this, finally, the front of it isn't working all that well. It's a bit crinkly around the front. And I realize that I'm going to have to put another piece just around the front section to make it look a little better. But in general, when I look at this now and it's starting to go off, I think it's looking okay. It certainly looks like the sail does on the picture. So here we go. Now it's just trimming time, getting all those loose bits off. Now here is the deck. Look at that. A lot of work in that, but it's really worth it in the end. If you look at it closely, it's not wonderful, but you never will. This is going to be a standoff model. People won't be studying it. Now, according to the plan, there are little plates underneath this, and I'm just gluing them all in place. Because when you look down, that's what you're going to see. And I'm actually using black plastic to do that. But it's all looking good.